Hey there, and thanks for joining us today on Hay Talk with Massey Ferguson. I'm Jessica Williamson, Livestock and Forage Manager with AGCO.
And I'm Matt LeCroy, Director of Marketing for Massey Ferguson and Heston by Massey Ferguson Hay Equipment. And we're here to help you get the best hay possible. And this season on Hay Talk, we're diving even deeper, looking into how you can maximize your output, get the most from your equipment, and more.
What's up for today's episode? We're all about raking. We'll discuss rake type, timing of raking, why it matters, forage moisture and its impacts, and look at a recent study that we've done here at Massey Ferguson. So stick around after the break to catch up on everything raking.
And we're back, and today we're talking about raking and all types of rakes and raking operations as well. It's something that's near and dear to my heart, Jessica. I think the raking process is a very important and sometimes overlooked part of the entire process because if you're raking incorrectly, you're adding ash content, you're affecting your uh, quality of hay at the end, and also you could be, if you're not doing everything correctly, adding more time to your day, adding more time to the process. So let's look at some stuff like that. We're going to start talking about different types of rakes. So one type of rake that is the most popular in North America is going to be a wheel rake. They're usually in a V pattern, sometimes a Y pattern, but a wheel rake is the most popular. We offer several different sizes, going up to 28 feet here at Massey Ferguson, going all the way down to a 10-wheel V rake for the economy sizes. But wheel rakes, one thing to always keep in mind is make sure you've got your flotation set properly. Some people don't always have that set properly, and I had a very good quote from Dr. Lisa Baxter at University of Georgia one time, and I think she got it from one of her professors at one time as well. But keep in mind that a rake, regardless if it's a rotary rake or wheel rake, is not a piece of tillage equipment. So when you see that plume of dust come up behind you, and it's coming from the ground, you're adding ash content to your hay. So keep that kind of stuff in mind when you're doing it. A secondary type, and it's gaining in popularity really fast, is a rotary rake. We make quite a few different sizes of rotary rakes. You can go from the smallest being a single rotor. That's going to do somewhere around 10 to 12 feet of raking width. And on those, you would go down one pass and then come back and make a second one. You could put two together at that point, or you can leave them separate depending on how heavy your crop is and what kind of baler you're running behind it. Then you start getting into the two rotor rakes. You have some that are side delivery, some that are center delivery, and you need to make sure you talk to your local Massey Ferguson dealer and choose the right rake for your operation. Because if you start getting into the 28-foot side delivery rakes, you're either going to have to racetrack all the way around your field, or you're going to have to put, uh, you know, 56 feet together into one windrow. So you got to make sure your baler's big enough to handle that, right? Um, there's a lot of different um, information out there. One thing I will say is if you do look at a rotary rake and you want to go for that super high quality hay, is make sure you run it properly. Some people seem to think that you can run faster with a wheel rake, and you can maybe run a little bit faster, but for the most part, if you're running a rotary rake properly, it runs almost just as fast as a wheel rake. There is a little bit of a higher cost to a rotary rake. They're usually a little more robust because of their design, because they do have a drive train in them. You're going to run off the PTO. And so you have a little more cost that's involved there, but your end result is going to be a lot more conducive to a higher quality hay. By that I mean when you're not going to incorporate as much ash content into your windrow as well. You continue the dry down process when you use a rotary rake, so you can actually rake a little bit earlier, and it continues that dry down process because the windrow is really fluffy. You can check out some videos we put on YouTube about that. So I've got a question for you. Best time to rake. Now, I just mentioned, you can rake earlier with some stuff than others, but when's the best time to rake? Is it going to be a time of day? Is it going to be a certain moisture level? And does it, you know, matter what kind of baler you're going to use? If you use a square baler or a round baler or anything.
So, first and foremost, just like with everything with our haying operations, we need to keep an eye on the weather. A lot of what's dependent on when to rake in terms of the level of forage moisture is going to depend on what we're looking at in terms of upcoming weather. If we have a really, really bright and sunny, clear, good drying day, we can rake that hay earlier in the drying process. And the earlier we rake it, the higher the moisture content that we rake that hay, the more we're going to retain those leaves. And that goes for both alfalfa, clover, grasses, etc. Because whenever we look behind us and we see the dust behind us, some of that is ash content, some of that is our leaf content. And we do not want to see the shattering of those leaves coming off of our rake. Just to really reiterate something that you said at the very beginning, I love that you said this, that raking can really optimize our forage quality or really, really decimate our forage quality. It's a really overlooked process in the entire hay harvesting cycle. A lot of times, operations will put their least skilled operator on a rake. And these guys will either run too fast, run their PTO speed too fast if they're using something like a rotary rake. And all of these things are going to lead to overall forage quality loss. If we have uneven windrows, it could lead to poor baling in terms of our bale formation. So it's really important that we're trying to optimize our raking as best as possible. If we do have a rotary rake, just like Lisa said, we need to make sure that those tines are not digging into the ground. That's just going to incorporate more ash content into that bale. And we know that ash has an inverse relationship with energy content. So if we have an increase of 4% ash content above what's innately in that crop, we're going to get a reduction of 4% energy content. And so, if we're talking about time of day to rake, or perhaps we should better talk about forage moisture. If we have a really good drying day, we can rake in that 35, 40, 45% moisture range, especially if we're using a rotary rake. We did a study this past year up in Pasco, Washington, where we took a look at different windrow formations, looking at a Darf wheel rake, a twin star rake versus our 802 double rotary rake. And we really saw that increased fluffiness. You could almost see light through the windrow. It was such a nice fluffy windrow versus the roping of the other types of windrows where we're really not allowing that air to pass through or that sunlight to penetrate through to continue that dry down process. So we can err on the side of a little bit higher moisture if we're in an area or if we have a day of good dry down. One thing that we want to avoid, if at all possible, is raking that crop into a windrow and then having to ted it back out again. That's really where we start to lose a lot of nutrients. And if we rake too early, and we can't get that crop dried down in the windrow, it may be necessary to ted it back out, allow it to dry down, and then rake it back up. It's really important that we don't get those wet spots in the bales. So we want to make sure that that windrow is dried through entirely if we're talking about making dry hay. Of course, this is going to be different with silage bale production. So a lot of times if we rake at too high of a moisture, we may have to ted it back out and let it dry down some and then re-rake it. But that, of course, is what we do not want to do. We're really going to see a lot of forage a lot of forage quality loss, and see a lot of leaf loss and ash incorporation.
Yeah. So I've already made a mistake because back on season 1 of Massey Ferguson Hay Talk, I was talking to Dr. Undersander, and we were talking about windrows
Mm-hmm.
and, where the name came from and that kind of thing. And it might lead people to believe that air and or wind is going to actually dry down the hay faster, but we know that solar is
Mm-hmm.
actually way more conducive to dry down. So I told him, and I've already failed at my task to stop calling them windrows and call them sunrows, because that's what's going to do the majority of your dry down, right? So
Yep.
that leads me back to one of our earlier conversations from season 2 here, that you and I were talking about width of your swath when you're cutting. So I'm thinking width of your raking swath as well. I mean, as long as your pickup on your square baler or round baler is wide enough to pick up the crop, you'd want to have it as wide as you can get by with the width of your tires on your tractor.
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of the width of your windrow or your sunrow, you want to make that as wide as possible because we just want to continue that dry down process. It's really common for it's common for the rake to go in front of the baler in a lot of operations, and
Mhm.
sometimes due to time issues, that's how we have to do it. Ideally, we want to rake that much earlier so that we can retain those leaves. The higher the moisture content, the better the leaf retention, regardless of crop. And so, we want to maximize the width of that windrow as much as possible. That's going to help to continue the dry down process. It's also going to help to ensure better bale formation.
Yeah, and for the audience, also keep in mind when we're talking about leaves, we're not just talking about alfalfa, because
Yep.
most crops have leaves, unless you're just looking for roughage, or you're baling straw, obviously, that kind of stuff. So
Yep.
I'd like you to give us some deeper insight information from the study you mentioned earlier up in Pasco, Washington, with the different types of rakes and what you saw. Do you have more in-depth information on that you can provide with us?
Yep. So, one of the main questions that we were looking to answer was ash incorporation into the crop during raking, and also what does that lead to at baling. And so we looked at 3 different rake types. I mentioned those before. We looked at a wheel rake, a twin star rake, and one of our double rotary rakes. And we ran those at 3 different speeds, 5, 7, and 9 mile an hour. We wanted to compare forage quality at all of those different speeds. We also wanted to compare windrow formation. And whenever we're talking about windrow formation, what I was looking for was a really nice, uniform, fluffy windrow. And so we actually measured it at 3 different points throughout the width of the windrow to determine whether or not it had a uniform windrow formation. We also looked at width of the windrow. And we found that the rotary rake had the most uniform windrow throughout the entire field. We had that nice fluffy formation. Like I said, you could almost see light through the top of the crop as it's already raked. So we know that we're getting a lot of sunlight penetration through that. We saw roping from the wheel rake and from the twin star rake. Which this hay that we raked had no problem drying down. We had a very good drying day, regardless of rake type. So I do want to mention that we didn't see any reduction in drying for any of them. But on a day that perhaps we didn't have quite as good of drying conditions, that nice uniformity of the windrow that was made by the rotary rake would definitely be preferred. Another thing that we saw was across all 3 speeds, our double rotary rake had the least ash content compared to all 3 rakes. So all 3 rakes compared to one another, as well as at the 5, 7, and 9 mile an hour speeds, the double rotary rake had the least amount of ash content. Like we said before, ash content is inversely related to energy content. So that in turn is just going to lead to more dollars in the hay producer's pocket because they're going to have overall better quality forage.
Very good information. Jessica, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, I'd like for you to do a little agronomy spotlight here. You spend a lot of your time in the field, probably half the time in the field and half the time collating your data and putting together
Hmm.
charts and graphs and all that kind of stuff so that we can get the information out to uh, farmers to maybe make them think of something a little bit different way or make different ROI changes. But what can you tell me about some of the studies that we here at AgCo do? How many you do a year, and what's some of the top things you're looking at this year?
Sure. So we like to look at things that's going to directly impact the hay producer. And so some of the machines that are already available on the market, how we can utilize those machines to improve the overall return on investment for the farmer. So this past year, we looked at, and I believe in the next couple of episodes, we're going to talk about these, so I don't want to spoil it, but we talked about ground speed with mowing, RPM, PTO RPM speed with mowing, tedding, raking, and just ensuring that our recommendations that we are giving farmers are, in fact, the best performance that our machines are going to give them. And like I said, we already looked at the rake study. In the previous episode, we talked about the Protect project that we looked at over a 2-year period. This upcoming year, we're going to continue comparing our Massey Ferguson machines to competitive machines. And one of our bigger projects that we have coming up this year that we're going to conduct in Heston with some of our project engineers there is taking a look at the entire hay cycle and figuring out where we can best reduce our losses throughout the process. Can we make adjustments in mowing? Can we make adjustments during the raking process? If we rake at the incorrect time, if we rake at the incorrect ground speed, exactly how much crop are we losing? Where can we best optimize our overall harvest cycle to quickly improve overall return on investment? Also, then I take the findings that I get from our research projects. I work with Matt, your team, on research projects. I work with engineers on research projects, and I work with product managers on different field trials. We take what we learn, we convey that to our marketing group, we convey that to our product specialists, but most importantly, we convey that to our engineers. And we talk to them then about what our machines are doing well and where we can improve to help the farmer to make even better hay on the machines that we produce in the future.
Perfect information. I couldn't agree more. And just, that goes to show our commitment to make sure not that we just make more products, but we make better products so that it actually makes a difference when it gets to actual use in the farmer's hands. So thanks again for joining us today. Next episode of Hay Talk, we'll talk about machine recommendations. We're going to do a deep dive into recommendations, adjustments, and how manufacturer recommendations can factor into your hay season. So that's going to be an interesting one.
Yep, I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah. Thanks, Jessica, and thank you all for joining. And please visit us back again for episode 5 of Massey Ferguson Hay Talk.